There's nothing better than the smell of cinnamon raisin bread filling your kitchen. This country bread is soft, crusty, sweet, and it's so easy to make. Just look at the inside. There's nice cinnamon swirls, raisins, a beautiful crumb. It's fluffy. It certainly will be a hit and a family favorite because it's absolutely delicious. Let's get to it. This is an overnight bread, so we will make the dough the night before, and in the morning, the next day, we will have to shape the dough and bake it. I added 4 cups of flour to the bowl, and I will add a heaping tablespoon of yeast. That's active dry yeast. This recipe will not work with instant yeast. It has too long of a rising time overnight for instant yeast to work. I am adding 2 tablespoons of coarse salt. I like salty bread, so I add 2 tablespoons, but if you don't like your bread quite as salty, feel free to only use 1. I will use a dough whisk to stir the dough, but if you don't have one of those, I recommend using a wooden spoon or spatula. I am getting tap water. I have well water here, so I'll use just my water straight from the tap. I have about 2 cups here. If you use city water, make sure to leave your water out on the counter for a couple hours to allow for potential chlorine to evaporate because it may not react well with the yeast. So I'm slowly going to pour the water into the bowl while stirring. Normally I pour about 1.5 cups to start. I then try to mix it as best as possible, but when I see that there's flour at the bottom of the bowl that hasn't fully been incorporated, I'll slowly add more water. It is easier to add flour than it is to add water, so I make sure not to wait until it's fully mixed, but I also don't want to add more water than necessary. So it's kind of this balance between the amount of flour and amount of water, and it's a bit of a process to add it slowly, but it really guarantees the best result. Most importantly is to look at the final texture. So here you can see that it's somewhat of a sticky dough. My hands, I dipped them in water, so the dough's not sticking directly to my hands, but it's a pretty sticky dough, and if I were to touch it with dry hands, it would definitely stick. Once I've achieved that desired texture, I will move on to the brown sugar and cinnamon filling. I use about 1/2 cup of brown sugar, and I will put a tablespoon or even more than a tablespoon. We really like cinnamon in my household. So I would recommend, if you are just like normal cinnamon amount, to put 1 tablespoon, but I will put quite the heaping tablespoon into the bowl, and I'll make sure to fully mix the brown sugar and cinnamon. Also, if you want more recipes like this, make sure to subscribe. I actually have been keeping my brown sugar in the freezer for a little bit just because I can't find my puck. I will get a new one soon so that I can make sure it doesn't get all clumped if I keep it in the pantry. But because I keep it in the freezer, it got a little stuck, so I had to mix it for a bit longer than usual. I like raisins, but I don't want an overwhelming amount of raisins in this bread, so I will use about 3/4 of a cup. That's a 1/2 cup measurement that I have there, and I just filled it extra full and left some that had fallen on the counter that I will also incorporate. So for this process, I like to have my cinnamon and my raisins kind of in little clusters. So I'll slowly pour some cinnamon brown sugar mixture and plop down some raisins. I'll push them into the dough, and then I'll just fold some of the dough over. Make sure you use wet hands. So you saw me dip my hands in the water there, so that way it won't stick. So I'm going to do a couple folds here, making sure that I have the cinnamon and raisins in more of the center of the dough at this point. And then I'll work the next little bit in. I'll pour some cinnamon on top, and I'll add the raisins, and I'll continue this process. By incorporating the cinnamon and sugar using this method, it creates these little magical bites that are absolutely delicious. As much as I love this bread, I try not to make it too often because it tends to be the only thing that my kids and my family want to eat all morning. So it's more of a treat that I make on the rare occasion. The more I'm folding this dough, it's also becoming a bit more difficult because it's building tension. So I don't want to do this too many times, and towards the end, I have a harder time getting the last few folds in. I probably could have done it in 3 different batches, but it works in the end. And I just keep trying to fold the dough and make sure it gets fully incorporated. And don't worry if some raisins fall to the bottom of the bowl and they're not sticking to the dough. As it rises throughout the night, it will take up much more space in the bowl and all the raisins will become a part of the dough. They won't get left behind. So we're just about done here with what we have to do on the night before. The hardest part was honestly keeping my kids away and so they don't eat all the sugar and raisins. It's actually easiest for me to do this after I put them to bed, but on this day I actually started this a bit earlier. The days sure are getting shorter though, and it is getting darker a lot earlier. I rinse my hands quickly, give it a quick smell because it smells so good. And now the last step is to put a lid on the bowl and let the dough rise overnight. I will just leave it right here on my counter. The next morning, first thing that I do is get to work with this dough. It needs to be shaped so that it can start its second rise and be cooked relatively early so that we all have a nice morning snack. So it rose real nicely in the bowl. It has more than doubled in size. It smells so sweet and fresh and sort of sour from the fermenting process. I took out a sheet of parchment paper. Call me crazy, but I actually get this dough started before I have my morning coffee, even before I've made my kids breakfast. I pulled out my Dutch oven and I will put it in the oven and turn it on. I will turn the temperature to 425 degrees. Now let's get to shaping the dough. I do everything on my countertop here. I will put down some flour on the countertop, and you want to put down a decent amount of flour because the dough is very, very sticky. I will be using flour to have the dough not stick to my hands as well as have it not stick to the surface. So I'm going to move my hand around the bowl here, and what I'm doing is I'm just scraping the sides of the bowl and getting the dough unstuck and bringing it to the center. This is going to make it easier for me to transfer it from the bowl to my countertop, and it's also building some more tension in the dough, which will make it a lot easier for me to work with, because if I just put my hand directly into that dough, it would stick to me all over. So now I've transferred it to my countertop. It's sitting on some flour, and I'm just going to press it down to make it into sort of a rectangle. We are going to use the envelope method to fold this dough. So I'm going to fold each side into the center, and then I will take the outer sides and fold them in. So it's nothing fancy, nothing special, just a couple folds. I had a raisin that fell out, so I just stuck it right back in. Next, we flip over the dough, and I'm going to sprinkle some flour on top just to make sure that it's not sticky. I'm going to use my hands and kind of pull the outer sides underneath the dough and try to form a tighter ball. So I'm slowly moving it and working it around, just tightening it. And then I transfer it to the parchment paper. That was pretty much all the work that we have to do this morning. The only steps left are to bake it. I will place it in a safe spot. I find on top of my oven to be, or stove top, to be the warmest place in my kitchen, so I'll put it there just so it rises nice and quick. It's also a place that my kids are less likely to get their hands on it. And once my oven is preheated and my Dutch oven is nice and warm, I will take the dough and I will place it inside. Oh yeah, and make sure you keep a rag on top of it so it doesn't dry out. So here it is proofed again. It grew in size and it's ready to be baked. Don't forget, before baking it, it's really important to score the dough. You need somewhere for the air to escape. So I just use some kitchen scissors. I don't do anything fancy here. I don't have time for a big fancy design. So whatever works. I'll put the lid on top of the Dutch oven, and I really do recommend using a Dutch oven to cook this bread. It will turn out so much better in a Dutch oven. It'll be nice and crusty, and it'll fluff up well, and it just makes it so much better. So after about 30 minutes, it's time to take the lid off of the Dutch oven. So I just quickly pop open the oven, take it off, and this is what will allow it to develop that nice crust that more artisanal breads are known for, or country breads. I'll put the timer on for another 20 minutes, and I bumped up the temperature by 10 degrees. After 20 minutes, the bread should be done. You're looking for an internal temperature of about 200 to 205 degrees. I won't be checking the temperature just because I've made this type of bread so many times and I know that it's done. I actually leave it in the Dutch oven for just a little bit and then I'll transfer it to either a wired rack or a cutting board. Here's what the finished product looks like. It fluffed up nicely, it rose real well, it has such a beautiful crust on it. But the real test is to cut into it and see what the crumb looks like inside. I couldn't decide at first which direction I wanted to cut it, but I figured it out. And it may take a little while to make that first cut, and try to let your bread cool for at least several hours on the counter, because if you try to cut into it too soon, it could end up collapsing on you. The big reveal. That looks delicious, and I can attest it was delicious. You can see where the cinnamon and raisins all clump together, and then there's other portions where it's more just a salty bread. I have my kids crowding around me. They were asking me for a piece right away. I had to make sure they stayed patient while I cut some slices for them. So when it comes to cutting bread, I honestly recommend getting one of these bow knives. It makes my life so much easier. It cuts so much smoother than the average bread knife. So we always have to give that first cut a smell because it smells so good. I spent so long using just the average bread knife to cut my loaves of bread, and I tended to kind of destroy them in the process because you want a smooth cut and you want it not to get all smushed together. So that's why I really recommend these bow knives. But if you don't have one, don't worry. Just let the bread cool before cutting it. So here's some slices of it, and it's time we try it. This is what it looks like. It's nice and fluffy, has a good spring to it. I don't usually eat bread first thing in the morning, but I just could not resist giving this bread a try. And it was so good. It was nice and sweet. I eventually made myself a coffee too and had that together. Give it a try. Let me know what you think of it because it's delicious.